I say my favorite title and most important title is mom. And I am big on engaging my young people in real life issues so that they feel empowered and that they can actually creatively figure out how they're going to solve some of the biggest issues. And so my first question for you, Elizabeth, is your first book, and we don't have a copy of that one up here, but was excited to hear. You call this democracy, and in thinking about that, and especially considering when you wrote it and then where we are now, I'd like to start off just by what really inspired you to write that book. And when you wrote it several years ago, could you have imagined where we would be in our country today?
Yeah, great questions. And I also just want to start by thanking you for bringing me to Columbia, South Carolina. I had a tour of the library and was completely blown away. You guys are so lucky. It's the Broader Bookshelf initiative is brilliant, and I hope spreads throughout the U.S. I'm definitely going to tell Multnomah County Library, my local library, about it. I'm also so honored to be sharing the stage with you. It's people like you who our country ultimately needs. And one of the things I learned from You Call This Democracy is how much of our democracy really happens at the state level, right? Our elections are run state by state, and so the policies that the state of South Carolina, the state of Oregon, they have for running elections really can affect who has access to the vote. And so, being on stage with a pioneer in that area is such an honor. So to answer your question about You Call This Democracy, I'll have to go back to 8th grade. I was living in Connecticut at the time. My parents moved around a lot. I lived in Greenville, South Carolina for elementary school. So yeah, Greenville. So we were taking a trip to Washington, D.C. And as part of that trip, we went to the Senate gallery and we got to see the Senate debating. And, I was up in the gallery sitting there listening, and I thought, wow, people make laws. That was kind of revolutionary to me, even though, of course, there were things in school. But, and then, I also thought, this is so accessible. And it made me think about what I learned in school, which is government is by the people and for the people. I had a picture of John F. Kennedy on my bedroom wall because I was really moved by his sentiment that you should ask not what your country should do, what you can do for your country. Fast forward a bunch of years, I had a fellowship working in the U.S. Senate, and I was actually at the time, was quite impressed with how I worked for Senator Ted Kennedy, and I was impressed with how collegial it was in the Senate and how he would really work with anyone across the aisle if there was an issue that they agreed on. So there was a lot about it that I was quite impressed with, but there were a few things about it that really shocked me. So the whole filibuster, which is, any one senator can stop a bill in its tracks, and they don't even have to get up on the floor and talk like Cory Booker did. All they have to do is say that they're going to filibuster and a bill will be buried. And I thought, well, what if that's a bill that the American people want passed and it just doesn't even get a vote? That just seemed absurd to me. And then also as I started to work in that milieu, I also realized that, the people who have power in the Senate, it's the senator of Wyoming has so much power and is representing so few people, and the people who are representing, New York and California, they have an equal say as someone who's representing Wyoming. And I just thought, what is really the principle of democracy? And I think most people will agree it's one person, one vote, right? That we each have an equal say in our government. And so I became very interested in figuring out how the structures of our government may be helping us towards that goal of one person, one vote, and how they may be actually standing in the way of that. So that set me on the campaign to write You Call This Democracy, and the subtitle is How to Fix Our Government and Deliver Power to the People. And I also really believe that it's not a partisan issue, right? I think that most Americans agree with one person, one vote. And so what I was trying to do was really look at various structures of our government, things like gerrymandering and voter suppression, and figure out what things in our structure is perhaps causing this feeling that our government doesn't quite work for us. And that leads to the second part of your question, which is, We Call This Democracy came out in March of 2020. Does anyone remember what was happening in March of 2020? So I was going to be going on this nationwide tour talking about democracy and these structures and what citizens are already doing to make elections work better in their states and across the country. All of those one by one were canceled. I really felt the country needed to really look at some of these features of our government and the citizens, our democracy by the people, for the people, that people, ordinary citizens like us, can actually make our country work better. And then, of course, we had the insurrection. When I first heard about that and saw it on TV, I just burst into tears, right? Because I, in 8th grade, had been at the Senate watching this happen and saw this happening. My biggest hope is that my book goes out of date, that we don't need it anymore, that we don't need to look at these features of our democracy and try to do something about them. I don't think we're there yet, unfortunately. I was looking at, one of the things I learned is that so much about the way our democracy works really happens at the state level. It's like we're all obsessed with what's going on in the federal government and what Trump is doing and what Biden did and what Obama did and It's not that those things aren't important, but I feel like we're obsessed with that. When really, a lot of what happens, a lot of the way our democracy really works is, as at the local level and at the state level. It's also the place where we as citizens can have so much more impact, right? We don't have to, talk to people in Washington, D.C. to make our democracy work better. Like we can talk to the senator, and I can't because I'm not in your district, but it's like we're a representative democracy. We think all we have is a vote, but we're actually represented by people. And those people, we can talk to those people. It's easier to talk to someone at the local level and at the state level and say, Senator Devine, what can we do about gerrymandering in South Carolina? What can we do about automatic voter registration? What can we do? I think you have same day, you don't have same day registration, but you do have online registration, which is great, right? So, yeah, I'm rambling, sorry. Any one of these topics I could talk about for about 4 hours.
No, you're not rambling. But it's funny because you said that you hope that your book is not needed in the future. And what I would tell you is that it's more needed now, 4 years later, than it was when you first wrote it. And I think as we move forward, it's going to be even more needed. And I'll just share with you, it's interesting because as you're talking, several things hit me. But one of the things that you said was about how laws can help people, but they also can stand in the way. And typically when people ask me, I get asked a lot, like, what made you run for office, et cetera, and I always say that as a lawyer, I never thought I wanted to be a political person, but I always wanted to be a lawyer because I love the law and love to kind of figure it out. But as a prosecutor, especially in domestic violence and sexual assault, which is, really mainly most people consider a gender rights issue, I found where our laws were inadequate to really protect citizens. And so I've realized that being a lawyer is fine, but you really can't do much of anything. You have to be in the place where you actually can make and change laws. But I tell people that, but then I also say that I realize now that you actually don't even have to be a lawmaker to change laws because, again, representative government, the people are there to change laws if we feel so empowered. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on, you talked about kind of the gerrymandering and all that stuff. And I would tend to tell you that average citizen doesn't understand democracy and doesn't understand the terms that you talked about. And so I do feel like we've got to educate our electorate more. So I know your books, you're really looking at empowering youth, which I truly believe they're not our future, they're actually our present, and they're our saving grace. But how do you see that, like, when you have adults who don't understand, who their senators are, or don't understand that, you can vote in your district and you all may think the same, but you're still the minority because the way the districts are gerrymandered. You have adults who understand that. What would you say? How can we educate everyone, the young people with your books and getting them engaged, but how can we educate the masses on these very critical issues that you address in all your books, so that we can be a more empowered citizenry?
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons why it's so exciting to be on the stage with you is that there are so many different ways that we do this, right? I'm a writer, so, I see my job as, trying to, research and understand the structures and then write about it in a way, each of the chapters where I take on each of these issues, I start with a story, and it's often a citizen who, experienced something and started to be concerned. And so I do it through storytelling. I introduce you to these ideas through storytelling. And even though, so these 3 books are kind of young adult crossover. So I think that I hope that they, can be read and enjoyed by, high school, college, and adult people. But I think, it's like, and then your role as a lawmaker is like, there are other things that I've written about that are based on law. Like, they're based on things that our legislature did. And then they're also based on things that our judiciary is doing, right? So it's like, I feel like when they talk about, the 4 pillars, one being the media, I mean, I don't really think of myself as media. I think of myself more as a writer, which I guess is like a form of media. But I feel like we all kind of play a role in upholding our democracy. When I do travel around doing school visits, elementary, middle school, and high school visits, and one of the things that I recommend for young people, but I think this is true for everybody, is that I think that we all think about Election Day in November, that's the most important thing. But what I urge young people, and I think adults too, to do is that we should become cell phone citizens. So I ask them to take out their cell phones, and depending on where I am, I usually have this information, but I will, look up and say, okay, who is your state senator? Who is your state representative? Who is your U.S. senator? Who is your U.S. representative? And who is your governor? And you put them in your cell phone. You put those contacts in the cell phone. You put in their phone numbers, and you put in their email addresses. And when something concerns you, we are representative democracy. Reach out to them. So you don't have to wait till November election to speak your mind. And so I think it's a simple message, but I think it can be so powerful that we don't have to wait till election day, that we can actually be, and I hope, this is one of the things I was going to ask you is like, how do you respond to constituents, right? I read some research for the book that talked to people in the federal level, to representatives and senators, about constituents reaching out, and it was like huge percentages of them welcomed hearing from constituents, wanted to hear more from them, wanted to know their personal stories, wanted to know what specifically they wanted changed. And then that was more powerful than a lot of other things that they dealt with during the day. So one of my things is like, as a writer and researcher, like I learned that. And when I said I wanted to ask you questions, is I was like, so, what is it like hearing from constituents, and how do you respond when, the people that you're representing have a concern, and how that's a part of the democracy that I feel like isn't focused on enough. And I have personal curiosity about it. I also want to know for this group, like, these are possibly your constituents. Is that true? Some? Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, I will tell you that I tend to say, even though there are certain people who live in my district and you can vote for me, of course, the lines, people don't care, like, if I'm on this side of the street versus this side of the street. So I tend to say everybody is my constituent. So yes, everyone in here is my constituent. But it's interesting. I'm answering your question, but I will tell you, you talk about the cell phone thing. This is what I do when I speak, especially to young people. I tell people to take out your cell phone. And if you all do not have the SC Legislature app, I encourage you to go to your app store and download it. Is it everybody in here ever heard of the SC Legislature app? No, I know Elaine, you have, but
I mean, can we do it right now?
so there's an app. It's SC Legislature. Go to your app store. You can download it, and you can put in your address, and then it'll tell you who your House member is, who your senator is. You can click the little button to follow them, and so it tells you what they're doing, if they introduced legislation, how they voted, if their legislation that they've introduced is moving. You can do all that. And then you can track legislation. So if you are interested in education, if you're interested in climate change, if you're interested in cryptocurrency, you can put in that term, search term, and it'll tell you every single bill that comes up in that relates to that issue. And then you can click to follow that bill. So if you want to know when there's going to be hearing on anti-DEI legislation, you would probably know quicker than I would if you're following it in the app, because those committee meetings, as soon as they get scheduled, even before they send us the notice, it'll be uploaded in the app and it'll ping you, and you'll know that Thursday at 3 o'clock, subcommittee's having this hearing. So it's a really, really great app, and I encourage everyone to have that. But to answer your question about hearing from constituents, I love hearing from constituents. Actually, even now in off season, our legislature, we meet January through May. And then now is our what we call our off session, but the work doesn't end. A lot of times it gears up more. And so I spend one day a week in my Senate office, even during the off session, and I meet with constituents who have concerns or issues. And so I'm in there one day a week. But I love, and I always tell people when I go to community meetings, if you are waiting to a community meeting to tell me about an issue, that you shouldn't be waiting. You should be engaging with me so that when I'm coming to your community meeting, I'm giving you the answer to what you came to me for 2 weeks ago. And so I love hearing from citizens. But I'll be honest, I'll be real candid and transparent. One of my frustrations, though, is that, and it's not a frustration with citizens, it's just a frustration with our system. To my last question to you is, it's frustrating sometimes that people come to me and they don't understand what I do as a senator. And so I have people who will come to me about, getting a stop sign in their neighborhood, or about, voting against the big, beautiful bill. And they don't understand that that's not my role. And it's a little frustrating because, I remember growing up and listening to Schoolhouse Rock, and I knew, what Congress did, and I knew, I'll be honest, I didn't know till I decided to run what city council did. And that was a whole new thing. Like, what do your city council people do? What do your county council people do? What do your school board members do? And so that's why I feel like we've got to go back to the basics, because I can see the frustration in people's eyes and hear it in their voice when they come to me about an issue. But I sit there and I'm thinking, like, I won't say helpless to help you, but my help can be advocating for you, just like you would advocate for yourself by calling your school board member or somebody else who actually has the ability to help you. And so that's part of my frustration, is that I think that we need to encourage more engagement, but we also need to understand who is in a position to solve your issue. Because you could be spinning your wheels writing letters to your state senator about what's happening in Washington. And yeah, I do pick up the phone and call Lindsey Graham and Scott, but they probably are going to pick up the phone for you more than, well, maybe not. I don't know. They pick up the phone for you. Did I say that? But that is really the case. But it's interesting because I have to say, in my 20 years in government, there are less representatives, I think, that appreciate hearing from constituents.
But it may be because the constituents aren't coming to you in an educated way, right? So that's where I maybe go back to the fourth pillar, right? So I feel like there's just this whole distortion. It's like the news is all about, Trump and, it's not helpful to American citizens. I feel like the media, and maybe I am part of the media, we need to be spending more time clarifying, right? When we talk about the big bad bill, that this is a federal bill happening in the US Congress, and it affects the federal budget, and that's quite different from the state budget and the state legislature. Like, when I write for young people, sometimes what you have to do is repeat yourself a few times before it sinks in. And so, I guess maybe I'll just take the responsibility back on to me and maybe the, media that I'm representing, is that I think some of what we have to do is not just record the news, but also educate about, give the context of how our democracy really works. Because I want people to be able to come to you in a smart way, right? And know what's happening in South Carolina. We were talking at lunch today about what's happened with the newspapers. And when I first moved to Oregon, Oregonian was terrific. It covered everything going on the state level, the schools, the environment. You just knew so much about it. Now it's turned into just, it's a few pages and it's kind of off the wire and what's happening at the federal level. So there's so much work to be done on every level.
There is. So let me ask you a little bit. So going from your first book to your second, and you all have not seen, this is, you'll be book signing. If you all don't realize, you will be signing some books after we finish the conversation. But what really intrigued me about this was about certainly the youth, not just youth empowerment, but the youth action. And so can you tell us a little bit about what made you write the 21 and what is it that you would like readers to take from that regarding their power to take action and actually affect some change?
Yeah, so I think there are many levers to making change happen, right? Advocating to your senator, representative. Another lever that a lot of people don't think about is actually going through the court system. So the 21 tells the true story of a federal case called Juliana versus the United States. There are 21 young people who have been affected by climate change very personally. Their health endangered, their property endangered, and they sued the U.S. government, starting with Obama through Trump and Biden and back to Trump. So this is a 10-year lawsuit. And basically what they argued is that the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says that the government cannot affect our life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So the government cannot make laws do things that will actively hurt our life, liberty, and property. So what they were saying is that it's not so much about the government needs to do more about climate change. It's that the government needs to stop actively causing climate change through drilling and permitting and subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune of I don't know if it's $1 million or $1 billion dollars a year. Big difference, but it's a lot of money every year. And this is from Republican and Democratic presidents of the federal government really supporting this fossil fuel energy system. So, these young people had the biggest goal possible, right? They want to save our planet, and they were taking on possibly the most powerful opponent possible, the US government. And they had on their side three things. They had the science, the climate science. They had a small town environmental lawyer who just happens to be brilliant. And they have the US Constitution. And so, there you can have climate strikes, you can march in the street, you can walk out of school, you can call your representative, you can do all these things. You can also, though, look at the laws that are on the books and see if there's some way through the courts that we can make change. Now, the Juliana case, which I talk about, so I wrote the 21 as kind of like a legal thriller. So I followed the plaintiffs and the lawyer. That case has ended. It was 10 years. It finally was dismissed. But they've started a whole legal movement that's in the news right now. So right after that case was dismissed, 22 new young people, 3 were plaintiffs in the first case that I wrote about, are now suing the US government over Trump's executive orders. So that's called Lighthouser versus Trump. And the exciting, crazy thing is that there have been 60 lawsuits that use this approach that have been filed, and youth are winning. So in Montana, there's a case called Hell versus Montana. They were pointing to their state constitution. Montana constitution includes a right to a clean and healthful environment. And these young people sued the state of Montana. I went to Helena, I was writing this book, and I'm like, there's this federal lawsuit, it's the same lawyer, it's Julie Olson and her tiny little group of tiny nonprofit that is working with these kids. And I saw these young people testify about their ranches burning and their asthma, that they can't breathe, they're ending up at the emergency room, these actual injuries, to these young people, and being on the stand talking about that, and then having those people followed by experts that say, yeah, climate change is real. We know that it affects young people in particular, and the state of Montana, instead of tracking climate affecting gases, instead of including that in the permitting process, they actually had a law on the books saying you cannot track greenhouse gases, you cannot include it in part of your permitting process. So they took Montana to court, and they won. And it went to the Montana State Supreme Court, and they won. And another group in Hawaii, Navihine versus the Hawaii Department of Transportation, did the same thing. It was soon after, do you remember the Lahaina fires? So 3 of the plaintiffs lived in Lahaina. When that fire swept through their community, destroyed everything, and it was a climate-driven fire. So they had this lawsuit. Hawaii smartly said, we do not want to go to court. We do not want the kids on the stand telling about how they're affected by climate change. And they settled. So we have wins on the state level. We have a new federal case that there's going to be a hearing. Also in Montana, they filed in the District Court of Montana in September. So I'm going to be going there. I'm writing the paperback for this book is coming out sometime next year. So I'm writing the update with all these new cases. I'm going to that hearing. I'm going to write about it, write a new chapter. One thing about all my books is that, and I kind of made a joke before about my books being out of date, and wanting them to be out of date. I kind of hope that's true with climate too. I hope nobody needs to read about these cases anymore, because we started taking climate change seriously, and we started to, fix things for ourselves and for our kids. What has been so inspiring, and to answer your question, what's been so inspiring is that those young people have started to make a difference in a way that no one on the adult level has been able to. And I think some of it is the power of the young people and their experiences, and also that they are inheriting this earth, and all of these impacts are going to last with them so much longer than they will for us.
Yeah, I was sharing with Elizabeth earlier. She's here the day before we get to the 5 days of straight 100-degree temperatures here in famously hot Columbia, South Carolina. But it really does hit home when you think about how climate change is happening, and it makes me think about the years. And I act like it's in the past. And there are people who still deny it, but the years that there was a denial of that climate change is real, and that we literally had to change the way we operated in order to not reverse it, because it can't be reversed, but to at least slow it down or stop it. I think we lost so many years. So it is very inspiring to hear about the young people. And I say all the time, most people don't like the way how young people are so impatient, but I think their impatience is going to force a lot of change. And so I'm just curious about like what made you decide to actually elevate that case, and what do you see? Like you talked about the update and following it. I could see you like lighting up. You're knowing all these cases. How do you feel this case and other understanding the court system, how that can start people towards action as well?
Yeah, so I got interested in this case when one of my children, so the case was filed in a district court in Oregon. I'm from Oregon. And one of my children went to an environmental middle school and was traveling down to Salem, Oregon for a hearing of this kid's climate case. I'm like, what's that? So, she told me about it. She came home. She said it was really inspiring. It was a hearing for this case. And at first I thought, oh, like this is another great way for young people to have their voice heard. That's really all I thought about it. And it wasn't until they started to, like the case wasn't dismissed, the district court had a ruling that basically said, like, yes, we do have a right to a stable climate. Like you can't have life, liberty, and property if your house is going to be burned down, or if there's going to be a 5-day heat wave, and we know what heat does to the human body. So I started to follow the case, and beyond, they went beyond all expectations. So I have quotes from professors who were like, oh, I didn't think anything of it until 3 years in when I started reading the briefs. And, it's a really powerful political theory that is laying the groundwork for us to look at climate change in a really different way. So I just started following the case, reaching out to the lawyer, seeing if I could get in touch with some of the plaintiffs. So I interviewed 5 of the plaintiffs in the case, and these are kids. These are ordinary kids. Like one of them was really shy. The youngest, Levi Draheim, he was 8 when he joined the case. He was living in Florida on the beach, and he was evacuated from his home 3 times because of hurricanes. And then he came across a map that showed that his house would be underwater in his lifetime. And he thought, I want to show my kids, or if I have kids, I want to show them my home and where I lived and where I played. And I'm going to have a scuba outfit, to go down and show them my home. Another one of these plaintiffs, Jaden, she lived in Louisiana, and one day it started pouring rain. There was a huge flood. She woke up in the morning. Her sisters were banging on her door saying, Jaden, get up. She sits up and she puts her feet down, and her feet are ankle deep in water. The water is pouring into their house. The kids are running around. They're like trying to stuff things into the cracks to keep the water from coming in. They can't call their mom because their mom went to a nearby town to help with flooding, and she couldn't get back because the roads were all flooded. And so she calls them. She says, take off, pull out all the electronics. We don't want you to get electrocuted. And then she eventually got home. The waters receded. This was a 500-year flood, so this is only supposed to happen once every 500 years, and they had like 3 of them in the past decade because of climate change. So everyone in her family got sick. They they stripped all their carpet. They took all their drywall. She was lying on a mattress in her bedroom, sweating, throwing up, and all she could think about is, at least I'm part of this lawsuit. At least I'm part of this lawsuit that is saying, my government cannot be doing things that will cause this to happen. So I think to answer your earlier question too about how we get people inspired, it's also, I think, by telling those stories, right? It's not, thousands of people affected by climate change. It's it's Levi Draheim and what he experienced, and it's Jaden and what she experienced. And I think that happens on the media level, but I also think it happens at the court. You know, when you hear those stories in the court, that becomes part of the court record. But that's when things can really change.
That's exciting to think about how an 8-year-old has, not sat around and playing video games or watching, TV, but is saying this is something that I want to do and thinking about the future. So that's inspiring. But it's interesting because you talked about the stories, and I think the storytelling is very powerful. When I'm on the floor of the Senate and we're debating an issue, I always want to personalize an issue for my colleagues. And so I will tell a story about someone who's come to talk to me. And it doesn't always change minds and hearts, unfortunately, but I do get some colleagues who will come up and say, thank you for sharing that story. And it does personalize an issue for them. So kind of to that, I thought about this when you were talking, is the power of the story. That is also a way that we can communicate to our policymakers and sharing our stories. And so how do you find the stories that you want to write about? I mean, I got the background of your daughter and knowing about this case, but the other stories. And then as you're thinking of future books, how are you finding these stories? How do you find these stories? And how do you feel about being able to do people's stories justice to the point that it actually inspires action?
Oh, those are such good questions. How do I find stories? Well, so first of all, I have a filing cabinet, files that are full of story ideas. So my problem is not coming up with story ideas. My problem is figuring out which ones are ready to be told, which ones I can tell. I was talking at lunch about this idea of a donkey. So a lot of times there's a topic like climate change, and I want to write about it, but how am I going to write about it? What am I going to write about it, and how am I going to write about it? Often I have to find a donkey, which is the way I transport you through the information, right? So with the 21, the donkey is these 21 young people and this lawyer. And by telling their stories, you're going to understand, you're going to come to a deeper understanding about climate change. You're going to come to a deeper understanding of how our government works, right? These 3 branches of government and how they interact. And you're going to come to a better understanding of the climate science. But you're going to do it because you want to know what happens to Jaden, right? When she, did she get better? When she and her family were sick, and then she goes to a hearing like a month later. And what does the judge do knowing that there's a kid there who was just dealing with something like this, right? Something you said about the stories that I wanted to mention too is that I think about storytelling, but the lawyers think about storytelling too. So Julia Olson, who's the lawyer, who's kind of the brilliant legal mind behind all of these cases, even though that case started more than 10 years ago, she was writing complaints and briefs for the U.S. Supreme Court before she'd ever had a trial, because she had to write stories that would appeal if they ever get a trial, and if they ever get, to the U.S. Supreme Court, they had to write stories that are going to appeal to the current Supreme Court, right? And so thinking about how you frame your stories is also really important. And I think I lost the thread of your question. What was your actual question?
Just the power of
storytelling.
Yeah, and
how I choose my stories.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And the power of it to inspire action. Because what I gather from, and we're going to get to your book as well, but you're writing them to share the stories, but you also are inspiring people to act. And so how is that?
Yeah, so the other thing that I do is, so I tell these stories, but in all 3 books, He Calls Democracy, The 21, and The Greater Goal, I have a chapter or more in the back of the book, which says, basically like, hopefully I've gotten you to care about this. Now, this is what you do. And I break down, not based on what I think, it's all the people that I've interviewed who have really immersed in this process. Like, what can you actually do about this, so that, the thing like the cell phone citizen and the importance of the state level for democracy. With the 21, it's like, you can go to Our Children's Trust, you can learn about these lawsuits, you can support these lawsuits. If you're a kid, you can reach out to them, tell your story. It could end up being in a legal brief that is shown to some court in the country, right? So that's what I do. And so the third book, which is A Greater Goal, which is about the U.S. women's national soccer team and their battle for equal pay. So the last chapter of that book is really about, okay, so how do you find out if you're being paid equitably with, for the same work with people of other genders? How do you do that? If you're in a position of power, how do you ask the questions about, is our pay equitable across the genders, if you have any power? If you're a female and you're negotiating a salary, how do you get equal pay? So for me, all of these, it's like a topic, a story that will pull you in, hopefully, and never let you go. You can't put it down. And then you're going, well, what can I do about this? And then I put the last chapter in is, okay, well, this is what you do. Here are my 10 things that I suggest that you do.
So the greater goal is the latest one. What's next? What topics are you gonna?
Oh, what's next? This is an interesting question. So these 3 books were quite challenging. Dealing with the democracy and seeing, and then, the fallout of what's happened now and feeling like we still have so much more to do. Climate change, which before I wrote this book, I could do what I think most people do, which is like, the news, you hear about the disasters, you hear about the floods, and you kind of go, yeah, I know. And you don't really read it, you don't really think about it. But to write this book, I had to look climate change square in the face, read the reports about how bad it is, write, the climate is almost like another character in this book. Like, what was happening in the climate while this case is moving through the courts. I have chapters that talk about, what's happening. So I couldn't turn away from those issues. And then with A Greater Goal, which is about pay equity, in this country, women are paid about 83 cents to the dollar of men for equal work. And this is true in every industry, at every level of a woman's career. It's been happening for a long time. There's a federal law that makes it illegal. And so while telling the U.S. women's national team story, because they did win, they got equal pay with the men's national team, it's also really discouraging and heartbreaking. So all that is to say that I wrote three really difficult books in a row. Boom, boom, boom. So what I'm working on now is fiction for adults. It's an art heist. It's about 5 elementary school moms of elementary school age kids. Their elementary school does not have an art teacher, and so they take kids on this field trip to a gallery of a private art collector, and they see a Warhol and they see a Lichtenstein, and they look around and there are no security cameras and there are no security guards, and they're like, we could walk out with a Warhol and pay for an art teacher. So that was called Private Collection, and I'm working on a second novel, kind of a follow-up where these same 5 women take on the kind of male-dominated art world and museums and galleries, like some 90% of things on the walls of those hallowed halls are done by white men, and they want to raise the profile of female and queer artists. So I started with like the real vacation book, and I'm already inching into like, oh, she's going to take on the art patriarchy now.
But that's interesting, because first of all, you're right, but your first 3 are serious issues, but I think also because of the storytelling, it's serious, but it doesn't keep you, feeling really hard. But, we all need a break sometimes. So I think having a nice fiction book, I can see myself, I'm an elementary school mom now, I can see myself pairing with some sisters to kind of, do something, Robin Hood,
They're called the Robin Hoods, ROBYNHOOD. They call themselves that.
Really?
They totally do.
Great. So now I think we are ready to open it up to some questions. So does anybody in the audience have a question for Elizabeth? Do we, how do you want to do a club? Here, yes, they're coming.
Okay, so I think I understood with 21 that, so the cases first had to deal with states that had a law on board that said you're entitled to, whatever. So in South Carolina, we've had a good friend of mine who's now deceased, Representative Joe Neal, who worked for years that all South Carolinians should have the right to clean air, land, and water. Just to let you know that South Carolina does not have that in its constitutional rights as you're visiting this state. And I was hoping that you all could carry on the conversation. Tameika, I wondered if there's any hope to move towards that, and really talk about how you had to have a stepping off point legally to have this exist.
I'll comment first because the 21, the case that I follow, Juliana versus the United States, is a federal level case, but the Montana one that I told you about and the Hawaii one are both state level cases. And it's very interesting that you bring that up because there's a movement, and this is also a very citizen-driven movement to strengthen our state constitution so that they include a right to a clean, healthy environment. In Oregon, where I'm from, which you think like, oh, it's so green and so environmental, we do not have that in our constitution either. I just found out yesterday, so I was down in the Capitol in Oregon with a group of citizens who were trying to get an environmental rights constitutional amendments into the Oregon Constitution. I just heard that it did not get out of the committee, out of Senate committee, but in Oregon, citizens can gather signatures to get a constitutional amendment put on the ballot. So we are doing that. We're doing that right now. I think that that's an excellent example of where citizens can really have an impact. Like if I don't know what the structure is in South Carolina, but citizens coming around this idea that I guess we have a basic need to have, something in our laws that say we have a right to a clean, healthy environment. That's the kind of thing that I think citizens can really have an impact on the state level. And then you're right, then if there are lawsuits, well, hopefully there won't have to be because the state legislature would then be hopefully oriented toward that in their lawmaking. But if not, then citizens can bring a lawsuit. So I would be interested in hearing if you know anything about the status of that on the state level, and if there are any efforts in South Carolina to have that amendment in the Constitution.
So I will say I mentioned we have a 2-year session, and so if something doesn't pass in the 2 years, then it dies and has to be reintroduced. Representative Neal actually was my cousin. And I think about him all the time. And so this year has been 8 years since he passed away. So if he was the driving force behind, I would venture to say there probably is not a current bill, but I think what Ms. Cooper is saying is a perfect example of how ideas come from the public and from the community. You find a legislator who can introduce something and then help rally support behind getting something passed. And part of it, I just had my first session of a federal fellowship on gender policy issues. And so I spent the first 3 days of this week in DC. And it was interesting because one of the conversations we were having about was how we have got to lay a foundation to make sure that an idea comes from the citizen through introduction in whatever chamber, and then support from the community to make sure that the legislators support it and get passed. And so I would love to see that, maybe even as a test case, of how do we do that, and then using stories. And I don't know if this is the right story, but one of the things you all probably saw the last couple of days, we had a young man who died from amoeba. He was swimming in Lake Murray. And when you heard the statistics, it's not, 160 something people nationally have died from this. But one of the things that caught my interest is when the environmental people were on the news being interviewed about it, and the question came, well, do you do testing? Are there regulations, et cetera? And their comment was, there isn't any regulation on testing, and it's rare. But what they said is that first of all, young people are more susceptible, and two, that it is more common when you are in warm water. And so when you have 5 days of 100 degrees, and this is more prevalent, is it going to be more of these cases because you're not testing and our temperatures are getting warmer? So I say that to say, I think that there are stories that are probably out there that we have to look at, where there has been an impact, and how can we say that you have a right to clean air, clean water, and I think we've got to not take no for an answer, because what's going to happen is you're going to say, well, that's not our job, or this isn't it. So how do we not take no for an answer and elevate these stories? So thank you for bringing that up, Elaine. I think it's definitely something that could be a test case.
Yeah, and there is a national movement in the sense that it's happening across the country. So there's a website called Green Amendments. So, it's like, I'm busy writing stories, you're busy writing laws. We need citizens. We need citizens to also be, taking up these arms and talking to other people and rallying support, as you said. It's like, we're almost like a powerful triangle here if we could all start working together on something. So yeah, check out the Green Amendments.
I thought I saw some, right here.
Oftentimes we hear that what we really need to do is contact our senators and representatives. I'm thinking on the federal level. Here in this red state of South Carolina, if we want to push an agenda that is not conservative, it feels useless. And I don't know if there is anything that could be said with our present representatives and people in Congress and senators that would effectively change your mind. I mean, it's very easy to get discouraged. It's very easy to find that the only thing that really changes anybody's mind is power and money. And how do we get fired up? How do we, there have been protests down on the state capitol here, and they're really hardly covered. I want to find something that I think is effective.
So I have an answer. I'm curious at what you're going to say.
I feel you probably 70% of the time, but the 30% I have hope, because I know that, that they're, first of all, I'm a woman of faith, and I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. And I feel like we are in a place that it is causing people to wake up. So that kind of gives me a little bit of hope. But I also know that where we are didn't happen in one election and didn't happen overnight. So we're not going to change it in one election or overnight. And so going back to what I said before about laying that foundation, my mind has been obsessed with laying that foundation. Reaching out to the folks who are not voting, or the people who are voting against their interests, and explaining to them, when you elect this person, this is their vote, this is why you don't have a job. This is why you don't have insurance. This is why, and just really making it personal and using those stories But the last thing I'd say, and I think the most important, we cannot feel like, well, they're not going to listen, so I'm not gonna call. Because a lot of them actually use the lack of calls as an excuse to say, well, I didn't hear from anybody. Every single time, I mean, that bill, I knew exactly how our senators were going to vote. But I went on record calling and saying, I want to be on record that I oppose this. And I encourage people as well, because then they can't say, well, the state of South Carolina only got 300 calls against this. We need to really flood them on every single issue because, number one, that they're going to know that we're paying attention. But number two, we've got to be able to then use that data for when new elections come around. So I'm hopeful it's not going to happen in the next election, but we really have to continue to stay the course. But I think there is a movement happening.
Yeah.
That No King's Day rally was, it was something. And I will tell you, you might not think that they didn't pay attention, but I'm in some of those rooms and they paid attention.
Yeah, and I wanna second that too, because that's what I was thinking, that you might feel like, oh, it didn't have any impact, but when I worked in Kennedy's office, when we got constituents calls, we had to mark, who called and what they said. And if there was an upsurge of interest in a particular topic as a staff person, you had to bring that to your senator. I don't know how it works in every office, but I think they do count, and I think they are aware of what's happening. The other thing is that it's like we think that everything is the way it is and it's going to be this way forever, but Republicans used to be the leaders on the environment, right? The Clean Air Act was under Nixon or something like that. So yeah, we could say this is what they're doing now, but they've also changed their tune over time once, and perhaps they could change their tune again. And they're not going to change their tune if nobody says anything, as you said. But if there's an upswelling, and if everybody is, being cell phone citizens and calling and emailing and visiting, I think we have to get on record with what we believe as citizens.
I joined the Sierra Club, and they say that, we should write letters to y'all and draw pictures and not just email, but write letters and have a personal way to enter with our complaints maybe about the environment and global warming. Does Sierra Club have a big impact on changing legislation, or should I just come personally towards you?
Good question. I think both. Sierra Club does have a presence. The good thing that they bring an expertise. And they certainly can help you understand like committee structure, who to contact, that kind of stuff. They can give you talking points, but nothing beats personal contact. So making an appointment to meet with your senator, your House member, writing them a letter, sending emails. I will say this, and every time I'm talking to a group of folks about advocacy, and everything I say isn't end all be all, but from my experience, I'm gonna share with you a couple things. Number one, if you are a member of the Sierra Club or SCA or whatever advocacy organization, and they're trying to make it easy for you, so they give you a kind of a form letter, contact your senator and say this and cut and paste this. Form letters, form emails really are not persuasive. It just says lazy to us, to be honest. And so once we read the first or second one, you're not gonna read them more. They're like, this is the regular one. This is the regular one. The other thing is, and I told y'all about the app. If you go to the app or the internet, the website, it will say email your senator or email all senators, and you put in information. The way it comes to us is like, it has little characters in between, whatever. So it actually, it notices us. This person, all they did was go to the website and click here, and it sent something to all senators. And so I typically look down and I'll say, Somerville, okay, great to hear what Somerville thinks, but they don't vote for me. So it is really important that you engage with your senators and get your neighbors too, because that's really going to make a difference. But the advocacy organizations are really good because they have expertise in certain things. And so you can bring the story to the table, but they can actually give you the data, and some talking points, and those two things together is powerful. We got 3 hands up. Chloe, can we take all 3 and then that be it? Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
I'm fine with it. I could talk all night.
You mentioned about young people. It seems that across the country, and I certainly have not told it, they're not teaching civics as we took it in high school. We had to learn how government works. I noticed it when my grandchildren, who are now graduates of fine universities, really didn't understand how our government works. I think it's really important that we put civics as back in the curriculum that our kids have to take. I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
100%, and I think it needs to be more than just, your 10th grade in high school. I think we need to have the curriculum for elementary, age appropriate for middle and high school. I think they need it, just like they do math and everything else, because that's a problem. I will share it very quickly because I know we got these two. Someone sent me a Facebook post yesterday. It was interesting. I never thought about this. They were talking about the fact that cursive has been taken out. We do have a bill trying to put cursive back in. But someone said, hey, this wasn't, this isn't just, we don't want cursive. The cursive, everything, if you look at our founding documents, they're in cursive. And this post said, and I never thought of it that way, they said, the more and more that children don't know cursive, they can't read it. And think about some of the founding documents, they wouldn't even be able to read it. So if they make changes to the Constitution or they tell you something, they can't even read it. So there's a lot of things that we've taken away from our children that are really hurting the development of our country.
And I would just say, I 100% agree that, that civics needs to be taught in schools, and that has to be, I think it should be more than just memorizing things, but actually like, okay, students, what do you care about? Okay, if you care about that, what were the things that you could do? And by having them actually talk about things that they care about, teaching, okay, so what does local government mean? What is the city council? What is your state representative? If it's done in a way that it's coming from their interests and their passions, I think it's going to stick with them.
Speaking to the woman's sentiment of not feeling heard because of the state she's in, I just wanted to know, because I haven't seen it, that there are many town halls here. So even on a state level, I haven't seen you guys. I've been to city council meetings, but I haven't seen, whether it be federal or state, I haven't seen you guys do like town halls, because everybody can't go to a protest. Some people can't stand in a protest. Not everyone's internet savvy. Some people might feel like calling all the time, like you said, Somerville. They'll call your office, but I mean, it's not really, it doesn't go anywhere. But if you have a town hall right here at the library, most of the people sitting in the room are going to be your constituents, and everyone's voice is going to get heard. So I just wanted to know why I haven't seen that. I'm not even from here, but I know me, just looking at the outside looking in, I haven't seen that much here in this state. I did see the No Kings protest, but besides that, I feel like the town hall is like a little bit better and a little bit easier.
Thank you for saying that. I agree. And two things, they are happening, but I think someone mentioned before about the media. Sometimes they don't cover, and so depending on where you are, you may not hear about it. We'll take to everybody in the room speaking to that. I'm actually part of a town hall this Sunday at 3 o'clock at the Walla Kennedy Center. It's going to be on Medicaid, and so please share that. Congressman Byron will be there. Myself, Representative Terry Alexander. We're going to talk about what the Medicaid cuts will do to us in the state. And then later in September, I'm going to have one on Energy Town Hall, because if anybody doesn't know, we passed an energy bill in this last legislative session. There hasn't been a lot talked about, but when you start getting those bills, you're going to say what happened. So, so I will say, one of the things is just, if you follow your representatives and stuff, and then if they're not having town halls, call them. And if they're not gonna have a town hall, say, I wanna come see you. And, you have a right to go into their office and see them anytime. But I can talk to you about more of that offline too.
Please, thank you.
Last question.
I just wanted to make a point. In July, the University of South Carolina said they're going to be announced, they're going to open a Center for American Civic Leadership. I'm sure you're aware, and people are aware of that. It's civic leadership and public discourse, and they're going to have programs focused on civic engagement and political science research. So it's going to be part of the university, but also part of the community. Step in the right direction. Secondly, I think your book is a wonderful Bible for all of us when we need to look things up, and it's really a great resource. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a perfect comment to end on. Thank you so much. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Elizabeth, thank you. I hope that you felt our Southern hospitality. But thank you so much for your telling these stories and bringing them to us, because I think you're right, you're using your talent to really help save democracy. And we're right behind you, supporting you. We can't wait to read about our Robin Hood moms.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. It's an honor, and the library for having me, and everyone who has made me feel so welcome. I really appreciate it.
And we're gonna turn it back over to Ms. King.
Really quickly. If you enjoyed tonight's program, I do encourage you to come back on Sunday. We'll have a community conversation in light of Ms. Rusch's book. It's going to be 3 p.m. in this room. We'll have coffee, tea, and afternoon snacks. So we'll break bread just a little bit with you all. So if you enjoyed tonight, please do think about coming back Sunday at 3. I also want to just give you a little bit of some little last minute notices. Reminder that the library parking lot gates are closed after this program is over. So if you want to go walk down Main Street and enjoy the town, please take your car with you, because we don't want you to be stuck here. And we'll also be signing books. So we're excited. You'll get a chance to meet with Ms. Rusch and sign books. It'll be right in the gallery area. So thank you all for being here. I hope that you feel more informed and more inspired, and you got a little bit of hope, that 30% of hope that Tameika and Devine was talking about. Thank you all so much.